Welcome to the Nano Entrepreneurship Network podcast, where entrepreneurs who have transitioned ideas into the marketplace share some of the lessons they have learned as they navigated the technology development pathway. I'm Lisa Friedersdorf, Director of the National Nanotechnology Coordination Office. Today, I'm joined by Alexis Carpenter, the Chief Scientist at Triad Growth Partners AxNano. Alexis, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so excited to have you here with us. Can you get us started by just telling us a little bit about yourself and your company?
Sure. I am so happy to be here. I'm a fan of so many podcasts, but never have been on one. So this is exciting. So our company, AxNano, we do technology development for the environmental space with a focus on water. And what that means is we identify promising technologies at universities or government labs or things that we develop in-house, really focusing on the later stage R&D and E work and trying to capture all of the great innovation that happens in university and government labs and get those technologies out into the world, prototype them, pilot field test them, and go through commercialization. So we have an awesome team spanning from geologists to material scientists to MBAs that kind of help with each stage of that process as you go along. AxNano actually started in nanofibers and high strength, lightweight composites. And then just through some networks, we were connected with a professor at North Carolina A&T that was doing environmental remediation, which is cleaning up environmental contaminants. And so we were really lucky to get some funding to work on transitioning her technology, which really led us to pivot to focus on environmental before we were really broadly focused in terms of taking technologies that had commercial applications. And then more recently, within the last 2 years, we've really focused more on environmental and trying to target some of these emerging contaminants in water. So we develop lots of treatment technologies, detection technologies, really trying to identify what's the biggest problems in the industry and how can we develop new technologies to solve them.
So you talked a little bit about the team, and it sounds like there's people from a lot of different disciplines, and we hear a lot that in nanotechnology, that interdisciplinarity is really a key piece. Can you share your thoughts on when you're in a small team, what does interdisciplinarity mean, and how does that work in the real world?
Yeah, it is so important. I think a lot of times what we're doing is trying to figure out what's the right question to ask. And so everyone's background brings them to a different question. For example, we have 3 chemists on the team, but each of us come from a different background. One came from a very fundamental science doing proton electron transfer synthetic chemistry. And she brings a very disciplined analytical kind of questioning approach. How do we think about this on a very fundamental molecular level? Someone else on our team who's also a chemist, but was in biomedical startup space for a number of years before joining us. So he brings a lot of really valuable information of this technology has been working in the biomedical space for years. Why can't we take the same concept and apply it to environmental? And then we have 2 geologists on the team, one who has been working in the consulting and contracting field for a long time. So he brings us all down to earth and says, okay, what do we really need to do to get this technology in the ground or in the field? I think what's been helpful is recognizing that multi-discipline teams, one from different disciplines of science and training, but also multi-discipline in terms of how you approach a problem. We did the Clifton Strength Finders recently, which was really helpful because it kind of mapped out the way that we have been operating and understanding why it is that we can operate so well. We have people that are very strategic thinking, and then people that can kind of tune into what's the pains and gains of who our customers are. So it's more like an emotional thing. And so being able to tie all of those together to do technology transfer is important and has been really neat to see how those all come together.
Last time we chatted, you were sharing some stories about how you went from lab scale and were field testing and scaling up, and then you had gotten one particular area into a more advanced stage of scale up and we're looking at moving into a different area. Can you describe that in a little more detail about how you go from lab to production scale?
Yeah, as fast as you can. It is hard because a lot of times as scientists, you want to keep making the thing more and more perfect. And there's this great concept in the entrepreneur world of minimum viable product where it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be able to exist. And then you test it in the real world, knowing that you're going to change a lot of things to make it better later. So when we started with our controlled release oxidant for groundwater remediation, we were doing a lot of lab work, but we just had to get into the field. And we learned so much by getting in the field. And I think one of the biggest lessons learned was pushing ourselves to get into the real life scenario before we might think we're ready, right? There's certainly some cart and horse that occurs, but the soonest that you can test your system in a reality type scenario, the better off you will be. One technology we had worked really well in the lab, but we couldn't get it into the real world because it cost too much money. And it had one component that really prevented it from getting regulatory acceptance. And so we would have spent a lot of time tweaking this formulation only to then even later find out that we couldn't get it integrated into the area that we did. So what we've done is we've pivoted and we're thinking, okay, how can we use this in another scenario? And that is progressing much faster than the previous targeted industries. Certainly getting into real life scenarios and testing those as quick as possible, and also not being too married to what you think the original intention is, because it is almost always going to change.
So I want to come back to the pivot in a moment, but I wanted to ask, what has your experience been with federal funding and any other connections you have to the National Nano Initiative?
Yeah, so our company is located in Greensboro, North Carolina, which is adjacent to the Joint School of Nanoscience and Nanoengineering, which is where we first met at a conference there. And it has been invaluable having access to that facility, especially as we were getting started, being able to write a proposal to a government agency and say, these are the technical things that we want to do, and we have access to the equipment to do them without having to buy that multi-million-dollar equipment ourselves. So it was really invaluable, and getting started and getting those early feasibility testings done. So we've been really fortunate to get SBIR funding to support the early R&D and kind of de-risking some of those initial feasibility questions for the technologies. And especially in the beginning, when we didn't have a fully equipped lab, it was really nice to be able to leverage that JSNN, the joint school relationship. And then also just the network. So I did a postdoc, and, just the networks that are open within this nano community really spans a lot of different disciplines. And going back to what we talked about before, it's just so valuable to be able to leverage such a strong network of people in different areas when you're starting out in new technologies, and especially in entrepreneurship. I had no idea what I was getting into, quite honestly. So being able to reach out to people that I felt comfortable in the beginning talking with, and then build those communication skills to then cold call and do customer discovery interviews was really helpful to have that network.
So when you were talking about your pivot and how you were working on a particular formulation and then it was too expensive and it would be difficult to get regulatory approval to use it, how did you go about engaging with the regulators?
So I went through ICOR, a program through one of our SBIR, which was a very painful but such an educational experience. So ICOR teaches science people to get out of the lab and go talk to humans. And so through that, I learned that you have to really understand the ecosystem, the whole ecosystem of where you're trying to work. So if you were developing a groundwater remediation technology, you might think, okay, I'm going to sell this technology to an environmental consultant, so I need to talk to them. But in reality, you have to understand the regulatory component. So you have to talk to your state regulatory agencies. And so it was through that ICOR program and understanding the ecosystem and then talking to people within each node of that ecosystem that we were introduced to the regulators. And I think we're lucky in a sense that the environmental space, we were able to go to some of the working groups at the state level and give them a technical seminar and let them know of what we were working on, which then opened up some conversations, and they were really helpful in helping us understand these are the processes that you have to go through to get use in certain fields.
So I think that you just reinforced what I've heard from others, which is go early and ask questions.
Yes. It's counterintuitive, right? Like you think, okay, I need to understand this process completely myself, and then I will go and talk to people. But sometimes you might get stuck in a rut, right? You will construct what you think is the right answer in your head. And so then when you go to talk to people, you're going to be biased because you're going to say, this is right, right? And then they will be biased in their response to you. But if you go out and talk to people and ask more open-ended questions, you will find answers that you didn't even know you were looking for in the first place. At least that was my strategy. I think different people have different comfort levels in terms of the types of questions they can approach others with. And that strategy seemed to work well for me.
So I wanted to ask, in the process of scaling up, did you have to find partners in order to do the scaling up, or were you able to grow within your own organization and do the scale up on site?
In the beginning, we were kind of feeling out both options, whether we wanted to build all of the infrastructure in-house and make it ourselves or outsource it to a contract lab. And really, it came down to cost, ease, and also maybe PPE is the right term. One of the things we work with a lot are these strong oxidizing agents. And so you have to be super careful about dust handling and all kinds of EHS kind of concerns, to the point where it didn't make sense for us to build that all ourselves for one product. So we ended up partnering with a contract manufacturer that handles these kinds of things all day, every day. And it made more sense for our bottom line to partner with them as opposed to build it out ourselves.
Could you describe how nanotechnology plays a role in what you're developing and what types of contaminants you're targeting?
Yeah, we have two technologies that incorporate nano. One of them is a bimetallic zero valent iron composite. So the material itself is not nano as a whole, but it has nano components within it. So we're evaluating that technology for treating PFAS, which are everywhere. They are released into the environment often through firefighting foams. So they're a component within firefighting foams. They last a very, very long time because they were created to withstand, high temperatures, high pressures. They exist everywhere. They have entered into the food chain through the water that we drink and lots of different areas. And so there's a lot of work being done in terms of figuring out the toxicity of these types of chemicals, of which there are thousands of. There's also a lot of work being put into how do we degrade them and get rid of them because they are so hard to degrade. So we're trying to use our nano-enabled composite to degrade those contaminants in the environment. And alongside of trying to degrade them, another problem that the industry has is trying to see if they're there or not. So detecting them in the environment. It is currently done through a very expensive process with a long turnaround time. So we're using nano to ask the question, can we create a device that will allow someone to do real-time screening in the field? Can I go and test my well water, and will it tell me if it has PFAS in it? And so we're using nano to develop a device to do that.
You talked a little bit about taking a technology that was developed by a professor and then moving that into your company. How did you further develop the research and other activities that needed to be done to get that research from academia into a viable product?
We were really fortunate to get SBIR and STTR funding. So we had support from the National Science Foundation across a couple of different technologies. We've had support from the National Science Foundation, the Superfund Research Program, which is part of NIEHS, as well as NIST and Air Force. And really, these programs are great because they are R&D contracts that the purpose of them is to de-risk your technology and do that early out of the lab kind of prototyping work to figure out if there's something there. So it's non-dilutive, which means it is funds that you can receive to do specific work that doesn't require equity within your company. Not only does it give you the funds required to do the work, but it also gives investors within your company a level of confidence in saying, okay, you have been vetted by this SBIR program, which looks at not only your technical capabilities, but also your commercialization capabilities. We have found the SBIR program to be incredibly helpful in both of those aspects.
Alexis, thank you so much for talking with us. I want to ask, looking back at the early days when you first took this leap into entrepreneurship, do you have any advice for students or others that are thinking of taking this leap?
So much. I have two things of advice. One is don't be afraid to try something new. There's always other opportunities, right? You could try something new and you might fail, but at least you tried it. My other advice is just to get out and talk to people. And by talking to people, I really mean listening to people. Hear other people's experiences and really try and listen to what they're saying and not what you want to hear from them.
I think that sounds like great advice that we should all take. But
yeah, I can't say that I have mastered that skill, but
well, thanks again for taking the time to talk with us. And for those of you listening, if you're interested in joining the Nanotechnology Entrepreneurship Network, please go to nano.gov/Nano Entrepreneurship Network or email us at nen@nnco.nano.gov.